Oisin from Obol Technologies. What brought you to the staking summit?
To be honest, the fact that all of the major staking providers and operators and chains have come along, and it's obviously the first time it's been run, so it was a bit of a shot in the dark in active faith, but I'm glad we came. It's paid off. There's very few people that aren't here, I think, is how I'd frame it, rather than like listing who's here.
Yeah, no, it's been great to have you, and you're bringing such an amazing technology to Ethereum, to the broader crypto space. So tell us a bit about that first before we dive into other things.
Sweet. So what you're referring to is like distributed validator technology, which is basically the idea of taking a normal validator and making it run across multiple machines or computers, and even going one step further than that and having like different entities run all the different machines. This provides basically a load of benefits, and generally I hope it's the kind of future of staking and validating. But at its most simple, if you're running on multiple machines and you have different clients on each of them, if one software has a failure, no big deal. If one hardware machine dies, no big deal. The goal is that you have like fault tolerance, or in the Web2 world it would be called like high availability. I have been like working in the like staking space for a while, and when I was first getting involved, like before Genesis, and we were like trying to decide what do you do when stuff is when servers die, do you do some sort of automated failover or something? We realized that the slashing risk way outweighs the like benefit of having slightly faster like recovery or uptime, and we ended up just being like, nope, keep it simple, have like machines that sit there and run. If they die, they die. You have to go fix it. But this kind of bothered me at the time, because I was like, in Web2 technologies, Google doesn't go down when a server dies, or if you update the software, you don't have to take everything offline. So in Web2 it's just called high availability, and your SQL database, your Nginx, your Postgres, more or less all popular technologies run across multiple machines, and you upgrade them like independently, and if one dies, no big deal. And that's in my eyes where staking is going, where validating is going.
For sure.
And like I first got intro to this in late 2020, just after Genesis. The EF and Colin Myers and Mara Schmidt put on what they call the like distributed validator, trustless distributed validator community calls, and they were presenting a proof of concept made by Donkrad Feist, who's more commonly known as the guy that invented like dank sharding. But one of the things he also more or less kind of invented is distributed validator technology as well, because the man is a bit of a genius, and he pitched it, he showed this proof of concept built in Python of running a validator across multiple machines, and I was like, sold day one. I was like, oh, this is perfect, like this is definitely going to be a thing. At the time I thought it was very hard and didn't want to code it myself. I was like, oh, someone else is going to build it. But
and then you saw, I got to put up my hand.
Well, yeah, it's a funny story. I was working for Block Demon at the time, and I was doing kind of 2-3 days a week, and I was recently like self-employed and trying to make some software and figure out how I was going to sell it and stuff. So I was trying to make NFTs, because I came from Consensus Codify. So this was like 2020, before the real like NFT bubble, and I was like trying to work on like making these things, and I like tried to make NFTs for rugby videos, kind of like the NBA Top Shots.
Oh, nice.
And then we tried to like sell that deal, didn't go through. I was like, okay, what else can I like make NFTs for? And I was like, well, 2 days a week I'm making validators. Maybe I can make like NFT validators. Yeah. And I put together like a proof of concept, and I went to like a company that asked me to make an ERC20 token, like an LSD. And I was like, guys, don't make an ERC20, make NFT validators. And they were like, cool idea, but no. And I was like, okay, damn, I'll go back to like my old boss in Consensus, and I'll see if like they want it. And I like pitched them, and they were like, cool idea, but we're just going to build it ourselves. And I was like, oh, right. So it was like early 2021, NFTs are blowing up. ETH2 staking was like this, pretty big niche that like there were, not a lot of people had experience in, and I was like failing miserably to sell both. And I was like, you know what, Oisin, you might not be cut out for CEO. So I was like, okay, I want to go, maybe be a CTO or something. So I hit up Colin Myers, because he was running these community calls, and I was like, I don't know, I'm just going to pitch him what I've been working on and see what advice he has for me. And I showed him what he was doing, and he was like, well, actually, Oisin, I've been trying to start this thing called Obol. It's going to be, distributed validators, multi-operator. Like, I'm looking for a technical co-founder. I was trying to raise money, but I couldn't do it without like a techie that could build it. So, do you want to do this? And at the time I was like, pitched them trying to make NFT validators for a few weeks. I was like, man, it's way easier. And eventually I was like, okay, we're going to have to do the hard one. So we're doing, here we are a year and a half later.
Yeah, and you've made massive progress.
Yeah, like 200 validators across like 1,000 home stakers, and starting to look at mainnet in the near future, hopefully.
Yeah, that's super exciting. Yeah, well done. And so like talk us through, like I know some of your history is you worked in centralized staking, you transitioned to where you are now. Why is this important? Like why, what happens if we don't have DVT? Talk us through that.
For sure. So back in mid-2018 I joined Consensus, and I was pretty junior and I was trying to, make a name or gain some credibility to some extent. And at DevCon 4 in Prague, they announced Serenity, which is basically ETH2 or the ETH2 at the time. And I looked at the architecture, because my background is kind of in software architecture before I got into crypto, and it was 1,500 Ether minimum, and slashing was kind of implied as 100%. And I was reading this and I was like, you're telling me you have to put $500,000 at those prices down and you could lose it all? And my logic was, if this isn't your core business model, you're going to outsource this to someone. I wrote this article I called The Staking Problem, which was, it's too hard to stake and it's too risky to stake. So I was like, there's going to be these things called staking as a service firms that are going to stake your Ether. Yeah. And the dystopian reality that I was trying to describe was that there were 3 staking as a service providers running 90% of stake. And that was maybe a little contrived, but unfortunately we're not as far away from that as maybe we could be. And that was my big fear in 2018. And the end of that article was I don't have a solution for this. I have no idea, but this is a problem, and I want to say maybe we should stay on proof of work for a while until we kind of have a better idea. And fast forward 2 years later, I got one of the redundancies from Consensus, set myself up self-employed, got picked up by Block Demon, built and centralized staking as a service provider. I kind of thought there was going to be loads of them, and then all of a sudden we were running extremely large percentage of the network and double-digit percent, and I was like, oh, am I one of the bad guys here?
Yeah. Suddenly you're on the other side.
Yeah, I was criticizing it a while ago, and then I was like, wait a minute, how did I end up here? So that was why I was kind of doing the NFT thing. I was dubious of these ERC20 tokens and wanted to find some ways to decentralize proof of stake. So when I came across DVT as it's known today, I was like, oh, this is how we change things, because all of the rest of it, socially trying to force decentralization, maybe if you're very militant you can keep it, but with DVT you can have multiple entities sharing stake. I was like, this is what I was missing. This is how we end up with not 3 companies running them. It might be 3 liquid staking pools, but each of them hopefully have 50 different operators in them, all working together, and no one human or no one group has private keys to a meaningful percent of stake.
Yeah, no, and you guys are solving such a core problem, and it's needed, right? We can't ignore it, and like you said, it was ignored for a long time, and then you rose to the front. So well done on that. So looking forward, for the next 2 or 3 years, do you guys expect DVT and specifically Obol to be adopted by pretty much the entire Ethereum staking community? Because we know it's quite a competitive space in the Ethereum staking. But how are they receiving your technology, and how are they receiving what you guys are doing?
Most people have been super receptive. Generally speaking, anyone that's familiar with how the sausage is made and what's running under the hood is we could do with this. Particularly you talk to people and you're this is high availability validated, they run on multiple machines. People are sold, where do I sign?
Yeah, of course.
There's some people that are oh, I don't know, what's the story, what's the thing, but generally when we were at seed stage and trying to set this up, and we were talking to investors, they were this is a Lido competitor, right? And we were no, not really. We just want to bring this technology and release it open source and get as many people using it as possible, and trying to decentralize stake. And they were but you'll compete with Lido, right? And we were
No.
We're sharing technical risk between multiple operators. We don't really want to make a financial service that retail interacts with, and we fractionalize something, because if something goes wrong on one side and you blow it up, that's when the regulator comes in and says, you are doing what with whose oversight and stuff. Yeah. So we're no. So our logic was, we'd like this to be used by more or less all validators, home stakers, DAOs, liquid staking pools, and centralized providers. And the goal is, to get this software, adopted, and that people have high availability, fault-tolerant validators. They can upgrade their nodes without going offline. If someone steals a private key, they don't slash their validators. And generally speaking, net we want to improve Ethereum rather than own the best liquid staking pool on Ethereum or anything of the sort. So that's why we intentionally said no, stay low on the stack, try and be used by all of them, be a credibly neutral piece of software that everyone's like, yep, these guys, seem legit, the software's open source, I have no concern, using it. If they collect any fees, they, use that to fund retroactive public goods, not like how Optimism are funding open source software on top of L2s. We would like to, take a fee and use that to fund open source tooling on top of the staking ecosystem.
Yeah, that's so great. It's such a good public good, right? You guys are playing such an important role, and it's definitely going to help Ethereum in the long run. So another question is, can you apply DVT to other L1s, like Solana, like BNB? Does it work? Is it the same? Is it like a copy paste, or
Great question.
There's a couple of changes?
So the two things that really help for DVT is firstly slow block times, because you're running nodes in multiple regions or locations, and they're deciding what you're going to vote for.
Yeah.
So if you're in Solana and you've half a second, pretty tight, maybe not the most suitable. But Cosmos is 5-second blocks, Near is 1 second, Polkadot I think is 3 or 4 seconds. The ones that are a bit more forgiving give you more time to go around the world, because it takes 200 milliseconds to have messages go around the world. So if you are doing a few round trips, you really want block times to be more than a second for this to be friendly. The other piece of the equation is right now with our architecture, we're a middleware and we don't have access to the private keys.
Yeah.
And this is something that I think is super important, because if you do have access to the private keys, it's different. It's kind of a different risk model. They're like, okay, we really have to understand, how much we trust you guys.
Yeah.
If you're a middleware and the private keys stay in what you've already built in your, proprietary infrastructure, it's a bit of a less of a risk. But when it comes to other chains, the kind of two that I touch on, first off is one of them is kind of Cosmos. Cosmos I think is a great candidate for DVT, because firstly they have 5 to 6 second block times, which is perfect. And also, Tendermint consensus caps out at around 100 validators.
Oh, wow.
So a lot of Cosmos chains would love to, increase their operator set and increase their, credible neutrality, and they can't do it at L1 to some extent. So distributed validator technology allows them to go, okay, we actually can take one delegated, DPoS validator and we can run it between 5 people. So you can kind of grow your validator set by another, order of magnitude almost. So they're, a great candidate, and we've had some super promising chats with some of the teams there. And the other one that's maybe a bit different that I like to talk about is, over the last cycle, we'll call it, we had, many years of EVM forks, your Polygon, your Binance Smart Chain, XDAI, whatever. And most of them took out proof of work. They either put in proof of authority, they rolled their own proof of stake, they did some mix of both, or they did something or other. But a lot of them have been minding their custom proof of stake for years, or the POA net, and they're trying to figure out what's their future, or how do they scale and stuff. And I have this belief that the next cycle is going to be ECL forks, or Ethereum consensus layer forks. And we've already seen this happen with 2 or 3 chains so far. XDAI is one of the oldest EVM forks. They recently were we're going to fork ETH2 and we're going to do our own merge, and it's now Gnosis chain.
Yeah.
And things like Hex have done it, and I think things like Luxo are doing it and stuff. But I think a lot of the EVM chains out there, if they're not already happy with what their proof of stake or their POA or the proof of work is, I think a lot of them will be yep, let's fork all of these perfectly good ETH2 clients and let's do our own merge. Yeah. And we'll work more or less out of the box with any ECL fork. Wow. So that's kind of the two cool. New chain thing is all the ECLs will just kind of take the consensus layer, and we're looking pretty seriously at Cosmos as well and all of that ecosystem.
So that is a focus for your team. It's not you're only focusing on Ethereum, you are looking at Cosmos, obviously whatever else you can apply the technology to. And would it be major differences in the code base, or would it be somewhat
the
similar?
Cosmos will be very different.
Yeah.
It's they use a different cryptography, elliptic curve. So the MPC scheme you would do is very different, and as a result, your architecture is quite different. So it would more or less be a fresh client. We have the team and the infrastructure, and hopefully the sophistication to build another one, but it's more or less a second client.
Okay, great. And what's one thing we can look forward to as a community, like the Ethereum community? What's coming for Obol on the roadmap?
So the other maybe longer term roadmap is trying to figure out how do you continue to decentralize and strengthen and improve Ethereum, particularly as it moves to its layer 2 future. So we're focusing on the validators, because that's kind of the crux of the problem, and if they're centralized, then the rest is all screwed anyways.
Yeah.
But if you do have lots of decentralized validators, very robust, all going well, then you start to look at the block builders, and you're like, how decentralized are block builders?
Yeah.
Are they run by 2 companies, or can they be decentralized?
Yeah. So it's attacking each part of the stack.
Yeah, so you start validator at the bottom, they touch relays touch block builders, and above them are layer 2 sequencers.
Right.
So Ethereum is moving towards a layer 2 future, so decentralizing these sequencers is super important.
Yeah.
And a lot of the layer 2 teams have done a lot of work on this already, but what we think is kind of the future of this is if you have 2 independent layer 2s and they're there's no link at all, you usually have at least 1 block time between sending a message on one and it showing up in the other. Whereas if you basically do what's called shared sequencing, and you kind of can guarantee that to people running on the L2, that the optimism state update will happen directly before or after the Starkware or the ZK state update, and they are going into the same block together in one bundle, then you can have atomic cross-chain L2 transactions.
Oh, that's amazing.
So we think a lot of layer 2s are trying to figure out, okay, we'll decentralize our own sequencer, but we have to have network effects, we have to be interoperable with things, so we're probably going to shared sequence. So Optimism will come out with this, it's kind of part of their OP stack. Flashbots have kind of come out with Suave, that's kind of similar but with encrypted mempool, but the future is L2s and L2 interoperability, to the point that the end users shouldn't really know about the L2. They barely know. They barely know what MetaMask is. They just see the Google Pay or the Apple Pay pop up, and they fingerprint, and that's about all they know.
Yeah.
But it'll be between here and there. Will be all of the devs being okay, we have L2s. They're now getting cheap. They're now getting decentralized. Now they need to be seamlessly interoperable, and that's the kind of the EVM roadmap. Aside from maybe the other chain kind of roadmap.
Yeah, that's so exciting, and so many moving parts, but it's amazing. Everyone's just working together towards this one common goal.
For sure, it's super impressive chatting to some of these teams, and you hit them up and we're trying to figure out how to help, and they're amazing. We're trying to decentralize. We can't do this alone. So let's see how we can mix and match, and particularly the Optimism team, they're very focused on making a modular stack. So they're perfect. You guys are a modular middleware that's fits our ideology, fits what we want to do. How do we make it work?
And so they are receptive to what you guys are doing.
Super receptive.
Okay, that's great. Okay, but where can the community find you guys? Where can they reach out?
So we're at Obol Network on Twitter. You can find our Discord and all of our details on obol.tech, and they're the 2 main ones. docs.obol.tech is the documentation if you want to kind of get into the nitty-gritty of how it works, but obol.tech is the main website. You'll get everything from there.
Okay, cool. And final question, personal question, what project are you most bullish on?
I can't say Obol.
Okay, no, you can't. When token. No.
Most bullish, I'm really intrigued by Flashbot Suave. I often think about the adoption of crypto in waves no more than the internet was adopted in waves, and I think this was more or less the dot-com bubble. But in the dot-com bubble and the internet, everything was transparent. There was no encryption. If you sat down, you could see credit cards going over the wire and stuff. And when we talk to people in the Web 2 space, they're crypto is totally public. You can see everything. It's ridiculous. No one's ever going to use it.
Yeah.
TLS, the HTTPS, that didn't, kind of was a thing in 2006. It wasn't actually broadly adopted until 2012.
Wow.
So what I'm really excited about is I think it might not even be this wave, it might be the wave after. We'll get end-to-end encrypted blockchain, and it'll be more or less gibberish, and you'll be having zero knowledge proofs, and verifiably you can make something transparent when you want to with viewing keys and all of that. But things like suave or like the first step. It's like encrypted mempools. You put it on chain in encrypted manner, then you decrypt it. Shutter network is something similar. So what I'm like long term excited about is, like sooner or later, cryptocurrency will be end-to-end encrypted, and that's kind of like the far out stuff that I find academically interesting, but too hard for me to get involved directly in, I guess.
Yeah, no, it's so exciting. There's so much to look forward to. But thank you for the interview, and all the best for what's to come.
Absolutely, pleasure to have you on.
Cheers.